And I want to move us along to what is probably the most contentious issue on our agenda for today. There is a lot of debate happening. There's a lot of conversations happening in pro-life and pro-choice circles. I've seen many articles written about this in the last week about what should happen for women who attempt to have an illegal abortion or do have an illegal abortion. And so I want to toss it over to Josh. We've spent a lot of time talking about this week, and we kind of want to pull back the curtain for you about where we've come to.
Yeah, so I've always had a response to this question. It's come up occasionally in my dialogues. And like the portion of this question that we've always looked at ERI is merely the philosophical part of it, which is not the biggest part of it. We're not involved in passing laws, writing, legislation, like any of that stuff. And so kind of like this kind of strategy / legal side, we've just never had to get into before. And then Roe got overturned, which is not something that I have thought would happen, uh, maybe in my lifetime, if not, 20 or 30 years from now. And so given that this is now maybe the most common pointed question being leveled at pro-lifers, we wanted to spend more time on it and dig deeper on it and be able to help pro-life people with the rest of that, because we are here to help pro-life people to have good conversations with pro-choice people. Our staff, literally this week, in the last 4 days, have spent over 30 staff hours discussing this question with each other. There has been so much conversation and debate, and I think this is the most difficult question within the abortion debate that I've ever thought about. If you think it's simple, then I think that you think it's too simple. And I wish that you could have watched 30 hours of us debating, because, like, Emily and Andrew and I all had basically 98% common ground on everything, the principles, the pragmatics, thinking about like all of this stuff. And it is very, very complicated. So there's two kind of extremes on this question that we think are both overly simplistic. And kind of in ERI fashion, we want to offer a more nuanced third way of thinking about it. Here's the two extremes. One is that pro-lifers are inconsistent if they don't treat every single abortion like killing a toddler. You hear this from some of the abolitionist type pro-lifers that have already been saying are still saying publicly that they think that women should be going to jail for abortions like immediately. You also hear this from pro-choice people. There are a lot of pro-choice people that are saying, if you don't want to handcuff women tomorrow, if they have an illegal abortion, then you don't actually think that abortion is like killing a toddler. You must think something else. You must want to control women's bodies or punish them for having sex or something like that. And that's not it. So that's one extreme. The other extreme, and frankly, this is where, as far as I can tell, most pro-life organizations are and what they are teaching and saying, which is that every single time a woman has an abortion, she's basically just as much a victim as the baby is. So we think about how many women are coerced into abortions, which is over 50%. That is huge. You think of the circumstances that people are, where a lot of times women would say that they were even kind of coerced by their circumstances, maybe if they're in poverty or something like that. But so moral culpability is complicated. That's going to be basically a big part of the answer to this question. But I think clearly it's overly simplistic to have this kind of broad brushstroke kind of answer to thousands of people that you're talking about, if not millions, and say that every single one is a complete victim of abortion. In fact, I think that can easily come across to pro-choice people as like really speaking down to women. It acts like kind of like women aren't really moral free agents, that they have no choice, that they're just kind of always forced into this. And we know that's not the case. So what should we say? We have put together a statement. We're going to be posting this on the blog either today or tomorrow. And I'm just going to read the statement that the three of us finally landed on after 30 hours of discussion. We do not believe that women should be prosecuted for abortion because the state of public thought about abortion procedures precludes us from assuming women understand what they are doing in an abortion. One of the most important principles of criminal law is mens rea. which is the idea that you need to understand that you are doing something wrong or harmful in order to have committed a crime. This can have different levels. Murder requires a conscious choice to kill another person intentionally, while criminal negligence requires only that a reasonable person should have known that harm would occur. In America, women have been told for 50 years by the government, mass media, schools, and culture that abortion is a human right that harms no one. Pro choice advocates have assured them that the fetus is a non person, calling it a parasite, a clump of cells, or at best, a potential person. While pro life advocates have done our best to educate the public, we aren't in a place where we can assume that any reasonable individual will understand that abortion unjustly kills a human person. It is, after all, reasonable under normal circumstances to believe that your friends, family, professors, journalists, and politicians aren't all misleading you. It will take many years to undo the misinformation, propaganda, and deception of the last 50 years. And so, while a minority of women might have full moral culpability for abortion, which could ground mens rea, most women don't. It makes no sense to advocate for prosecution when only a tiny minority could be found guilty, and the rest would be unjustly dragged through our criminal justice system. This should not be taken to affirm that abortion itself is not serious or criminal, nor that the abortion practitioner should not be found criminally liable for murder. After all, the abortion practitioner ought to know better than anyone else the nature of the human he is brutally killing. The abortion practitioner intentionally and consciously kills a human he knows is alive. He has no excuse before the law. That is the end of the statement. I'm going to add just like one quick bit of commentary about that last thing. Just as kind of an example that I think it can be helpful for people to use when talking about what abortion practitioners do and don't know. There is a quote that I read well over a decade ago from an abortion practitioner, and I could find this and we could put it out somewhere, but I just kind of reference it sometimes, where an abortion practitioner was describing what it is like to perform an abortion, specifically a D&E abortion. And he described it as an electric current flowing down his fingers into his arm as he would dismember this child. That is someone that knows enough of what they're doing that I think that you could prosecute them.
So, in addition to that statement, and we'll be publishing this as well, there are a couple of frequently asked questions, I'll call them, things that we anticipate would be the number one reactions or questions people might have after reading that statement. And so I want to give Josh an opportunity to respond to those most common things now. And this will also be published with that statement. We'll have this statement as Josh just read it, along with these three most common questions. And so I'm going to put on a couple different hats here and play a couple different kinds of people who might react to this. And so the first one, I've seen this go on both a pro-life kind of person making this statement and a pro-choice kind of person making this statement. So I've seen both sides do this. And the statement would be this: pro-lifers who do not want to prosecute women for abortions are being inherently inconsistent. Because if the unborn are really equivalent to infants or toddlers, then you should be prosecuting women for killing them, just like you'd prosecute a woman for killing her toddler. If you are not doing that, Josh, then you are basically just admitting that fetuses aren't human persons after all, or that you aren't really pro-life because you don't really think that fetuses are human persons.
Yeah. So if we lived in a world where for the past 50 years, law and culture both firmly believed that toddlers weren't people, there was widespread ignorance about the biology of toddlers and their status as persons, and anyone could take their toddler to a medical clinic to be euthanized, and then suddenly that practice became illegal, we would be recommending the exact same policy. We're actually not treating this differently than we would that scenario because it's just a lot more complicated. We would be working in that situation to change the culture by engaging in peaceful protest, meaningful conversations, and government policy changes to create a world where everyone does understand that toddlers are people and killing them is wrong. We would seek to make killing toddlers extremely difficult to do by both outlawing the procedure, closing down the clinics where toddlers are killed, and prosecuting the individuals who are performing the killing of toddlers. 50 years of misinformation and deception about abortion makes abortion an entirely different scenario than any other type of killing performed today. Abortion can't be compared perfectly to the murder of a toddler today because while the two human persons being killed are equivalent in value, the other circumstances aren't. We should treat abortion the same way we would treat the killing of toddlers in an alternative reality, where 50 years of damage had created a culture completely convinced that killing toddlers was a human right. Our position is incredibly consistent.
Thank you for that clarity, Josh. I'm now going to throw on a specifically pro-choice hat for a section. So this is a comment that I've seen online. I actually read it from an article that we were tagged on Twitter, and they made this particular analogy from a pro-choice perspective. They were talking about how pro-life people should be thinking about prosecuting or not prosecuting women. And so the idea is this: if you purchase a gun online and you use it to kill someone, you're the one who should be held responsible, not the place that you purchased the gun from. If you hire a hitman to kill someone, then you and the hitman should be held responsible. So if abortion is killing someone too, then the companies who provide abortion pills should not be held legally responsible, but both women and abortion practitioners should.
Okay, I think this is a better question. Here's what we think. Mens rea is again important here. If a child incapable of criminal culpability was given a gun by his parent and shoots someone, the parent who provided the gun would be the one held legally responsible. If you hire a doctor to do what you genuinely believe is removing a mole, but what that doctor actually does is kill someone and they knew they were deceiving you all along, the doctor should be the one held legally responsible. This is much more analogous to what is occurring in an abortion. The company who provides abortion pills know exactly what that pill does, and they are actively deceiving women into believing that the pill does not kill a human being while knowing that their product will be used to kill someone every time it is sold. Both analogies involving the purchase of guns also assume that the purchasing of a gun is legal, and therefore it is how you use said gun the only thing that matters. When abortion is legal, which is a necessary condition of discussing the prosecution of abortion in the first place, that automatically makes it a disanalogy to gun sales. And there's significant legal precedent for prosecuting those who peddle illegal goods rather than those who purchase them in an attempt to more effectively shut down the industry. In addition, the assertion that companies who provide dangerous goods shouldn't be held legally responsible directly contradicts our treatment of the opioid crisis. Teva Pharmaceuticals was the first manufacturer found liable for contributing to the opioid epidemic for making and pushing opioids, even though they neither prescribed nor took the drugs. This led to companies such as Purdue Pharma paying multi-billion-dollar settlements to avoid further lawsuits.
So last hat that I'm going to put on here is a very common a question that I hear pro-life people say, and I've actually gotten this in many Q&As. I've had many online conversations with pro-life people. I probably hear this one the most often, and that's the pro-life person who says, okay, Josh, I agree with your statement about moral culpability being incredibly important. And that is exactly why we should be prosecuting women, okay? Because different women have different levels of culpability. And that is exactly what our justice system deals with, like literally all the time for other types of crimes. So a truly nuanced position that treats moral culpability well would be a position that prosecutes women in order to examine whether or not she had mens rea at the time of her abortion. So saying that no women should be prosecuted is inherently lacking that nuance of moral culpability.
Yeah, I think this is by far the best counter to the position that we're making here. Here's our answer. This ignores the very real cost of being charged with something and put into the criminal justice system, even if you're innocent. Our premise is that the vast majority of women lack criminal culpability. So this view suggests charging a lot of women who would be found not guilty in order to prosecute a few who would be found guilty. So let's walk through what would happen to the woman who lacks culpability in this situation. She's charged with a crime, handcuffed, and taken to the county jail in a police car where she'll be offered a public defender. Hopefully, she has her own attorney. Best case scenario, she's released on her own recognizance. Otherwise, she has to pay bail, likely involving paying money to a bondsman that she'll never get back for the privilege of not awaiting trial in jail. Her name and charge are published in the local police report, earning public shame. She's required to appear at the courthouse for pre-trial hearings at times selected by the judge. So much the worse for her if it's during her workday and she doesn't have paid time off. Maybe she gets lucky and the charge is dismissed pre-trial. Otherwise, after a large delay, she'll get to sit in a courtroom and stand trial over the course of one or more days and hope that the justice system gives the right answer in her case. And it doesn't always, you know. So, what's the point of putting the 80+% of women who would be charged through that ordeal just to sift through them to find the few for whom you could actually establish culpability in a court of law? Is that an acceptable cost to have the feeling of ideological purity? We don't trot innocent people through the justice system just to find the one person with criminal culpability. Aside from that, the flood of unnecessary cases would put a strain on the criminal justice system, which we already don't necessarily trust to handle cases well. Furthermore, women who are pressured or coerced into an abortion would now need to testify to try to establish that as a legal defense from prosecution. This will lead to he said, she said scenarios in which the prosecutor will trot out a manipulative family member or abusive boyfriend in the room to deny everything. And it will often require the woman to testify in front of the person who already exercised enough power over her to coerce her in the first place.